Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to you joining us in the hall this evening, and to those of you who are joining us through our live stream capability this evening. My name is Susan Letson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs, or as we all know it as CCEPA. We're delighted to have Dr. Ted Jackson with us this evening to talk about impact investing. But before we introduce Dr. Jackson to you, let me say a few words about CCEPA to those of you who don't know us. CCEPA was founded by the Atlantic School of Theology and St. Mary's University with a mandate to provide an arena for critical thinking, public discussion, and research into the current ethical challenges facing our society. CCEPA delivers public programming, funds ethics research, and offers assistance to organizations looking to create ethical guidelines. The work of CCEPA depends on the support of public and private organizations and individuals. We're grateful for the support of the following organizations this evening who are helping to bring Dr. Jackson to you: the Ecology Action Centre, Farmers Market Cooperative, the Port of Halifax, the Nova Scotia Cooperative Council, FarmWorks, and CBURN, which is a Canadian Business Ethics Research Network. You will notice that we have information at the back on CCEPA on the back table. Please help yourself to it. We've also provided you with evaluation forms on your tables, and we would welcome your feedback on this evening's presentation. As always, we welcome your questions and comments, including comments and questions from our guests who are on the live stream option. And to do that, all you need to do is press the chat feature. And of course, there's a reception this evening after our presentation where we can continue the discussion. I now want to turn the podium over to Arthur Bull, who is a Senior Policy Analyst with the Provincial Department of Priorities and Planning, who will introduce this evening's guest speaker to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. I actually was supposed to be Deputy Minister Rick Williams up here tonight, but Rick is out of the province and sends his regrets. But I was particularly pleased when he asked me to stand in for him, because I've been looking forward to hearing Ted's discussion and remarks tonight about impact investing. And also because it's a very timely discussion for us here in Nova Scotia right now. There's a lot happening related to this topic, so it's a great opportunity to have a dialogue about it. Of course, we have long history and deep roots in social enterprise in Nova Scotia. We know that, but I think there's a real argument for saying we're into a new iteration in the last few years relating to impact investing and social enterprise and social innovation. And we have the province has a social enterprise strategy, and there's a whole range of there's a new act about this, community interest companies. And we have the CDIF program and a whole range of things. But more than that, in the actual field, at the grassroots, tremendous amount of activity and discussion relating to this topic. Just a couple of examples. Ulnueg is developing First Nations social financing for Atlantic Canada in a very interesting way. We have organizations like the Hub who are convening people to have conversations about these questions, and CBDCs, and I won't go on, but there's a lot happening. So the timing's very, very good, I think, for this conversation. I think CCEPA and the sponsoring organizations should be acknowledged for having the insight to bring Ted here at this juncture. I look around the room and I think there's quite a few people here who know Ted already, if not have worked with Ted even. But let me just say that he is the Associate Professor in the School of Public Policy at Carlton University, where he's cross-appointed to the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs and the Institute of African Studies. And his work and teaching has touched on program management, program evaluation, civil society, higher education, community university partnerships, foreign aid, and many other topics. And Ted has been a frequent advisor to governments, to foundations, to labor groups, development agencies, and business. And so we're really, really pleased to have Ted here in Halifax tonight. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ted Jackson.
Thank you very much. This is a real honor for me. For many reasons, it's great to see a lot of old friends here. I began working nearly 40 years ago in the Atlantic region with an organization called Frontier College, and went around the region with a backpack, and we had community development workers on the coasts and in many industrial sites and mines and forestry operations. And in those days, you could be a laborer teacher, so you could do the work during the day, the physical work, and then teach English at night, do community development work. And it was a wonderful way to learn about the country, make a contribution, and learn about people who were working hard every day to make things, make a life for themselves. So I learned a great deal in those years, and I have a very deep sense of gratitude to the region for that. This is also an honor because I'm very impressed by the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Public Affairs. It's, I think, quite a unique organization, and it's a real asset, not only to Nova Scotia, but also to the country as a whole. And I'd be happy to have more conversations with you. I'm getting quite susceptible, if you know what I mean. So I'm here to say that impact investing is worth learning about. I'm going to take you through some research that I've been involved with the Rockefeller Foundation over the last couple of years. Nova Scotia has always been a place where there has been innovation with respect to community and with respect to capital, going back, as you said, to the Cody movement and many other antecedents here in this province and in the region. But there's new energy right now in this whole area of what we're going to call tonight ethical capital. That is ethical capital that involves mobilizing financial assets that are invested according to a system of moral ideals or a code of values by the owners of that capital. And you know a lot about this, some of you. One way of doing that is through screening out stocks out of your stock portfolio, if you own stocks, or bonds, by companies that do things that you don't like. Might be involved in nuclear weapons, they might be working in regimes which abuse human rights, in countries where there are governments who do that, or any number of things, polluting the environment and so on. And so responsible investment or social investment is a term that is sometimes used for that, screening out stocks that one doesn't like, one takes through the screen of your values. I want to talk about something else tonight, which is channeling capital to direct investments that generate a social or an environmental return as well as a financial return. So it's not so much in the stock market, and it's not screening out the bad things, if you will. It's actually trying to find the positive returns in a social and an environmental sense. So that's kind of where we're going. A couple of examples of what I mean by this from an international perspective. One, a loan to a renewable energy business, Husk Power in Bihar, India, which has biomass gasification of a rice husk biomass and generates significant rural employment as well as an obvious benefit around local power and reusable materials. A second example is mortgage financing for affordable housing in Oakland, California, rooted through a community development finance institution. Two examples, two different parts of the world, and we will talk about more examples tonight, but just to give you a sense. But let me pause here and tell you a story that I think is relevant to this talk. And it's about Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, as you know, a very remarkable detective in the UK. Sherlock and his trusty sidekick, Watson, were tired of working on their cases, and they wanted to take a break, so they decided to go camping. And do you know this story? Okay, good. They decided to go camping. They took their gear and they went to a lake, beautiful lake, outside of, in the countryside in England, set up their camp, had a meal, and went to bed. And in the middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes gets up and he looks up at the sky and he says, "Watson, Watson, wake up, wake up." And Watson is groggy. He says, "What, Holmes? What is it?" I'm not doing the accent here, but you get the accent. And Holmes says, "Well, look up and see. Well, what do you see? Tell me what you see." And Watson looks up and he says, "Well, Holmes, I see the stars. I see, I see it's a very nice night. It's a beautiful night." And Holmes is getting a little agitated now, and he says, "Okay, Watson, what else do you see? Look harder." And Watson looks up and he says, "Well, I sense the humility of humankind. We're so small in this big galaxy." And by this time, Holmes is beside himself and very agitated. And he says, "Watson, you idiot, somebody has stolen our tent." This story, I just like that story. But it does have something to do with tonight's talk, and that is that we need to see clearly. We need to see honestly what is going on in any field we look at, and that's particularly true of this field that I'm talking about tonight. And that we need to have a wide vision as well as a very detailed vision as well. So I'll try to present this sector experience, this industry really, that is called impact investing from both those angles. The big global scene here is that impact investing is becoming, in many parts of the world, part of the various sources of capital that all countries have, from government tax revenues to domestic private investment to foreign investment, charitable grants, and in poor countries there still is some overseas development assistance, aid, as well. But there's a real search on now for innovative financial instruments. And part of the reason for this is that we have a global system that is changing significantly. The rise of China, the 2008 financial crisis, recoveries that don't generate jobs, rising inequality. I don't want to go through all the bad news, but you have a sense of it. There are many good things going on in the world, of course, but in fact there are many challenges as well and changes. And so there isn't enough public capital or government capital to actually solve the complex social issues that we face. Everything from extreme poverty to climate change to HIV and AIDS. So there is a real need to find ways of levering new forms of capital, particularly private capital, but also government capital in new forms to address these issues. And so in the big global scene, that's what's going on. People are looking for new sources. Over the last decade, there's been a lot of work in the UN system and by some of the big foundations, including the Gates Foundation, around finding ways of mobilizing capital and trying to target that capital to social issues. Vaccine bonds. There's been some work done on this by the UN system and the Gates Foundation, others, the Soros group, trying to find ways of mobilizing front-end private capital for R&D and trying to push innovations into implementation, necessary vaccines that governments don't have enough money to put into. But there are other kinds of things that are being discussed in the big kind of global picture. How do you get the capital pools where there's most of the money right now, very big pools of capital like sovereign wealth funds, big public sector pension funds that are owned by people, but are sitting around in stock markets often that are not being used particularly effectively to address some of those social issues. So are there ways to mobilize that capital and channel it into work on the ground, but also get a financial return and also protect the integrity of that capital, of the principle of the capital? So there's a lot of work going on. Bill Gates has written a very interesting paper on this, which I have referenced at the end of these slides. And I think these slides will be available if you wish them. And many other things going on in terms of innovative sources of finance. But the one I want to talk to you about now is a dynamic small industry. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars that has been moving from what could be called uncoordinated innovation to building a coherent marketplace that has standards and institutions, networks, and a variety of players and products. And that's kind of where we're at right now with this field. And I had a chance to look at this for the Rockefeller Foundation over the last 2 years and talk to about 100 leaders in this field in 11 countries, including both advanced countries, industrialized countries, and also places like Brazil and places like Kenya and many other countries as well. And this is a very interesting field of activity. So what we're talking about here, as I said, are investments that provide capital. Though these are not grants. This is capital that is expected to be returned either through debt instruments, that is loans, guarantees, a number of other instruments, or equity investments, that is shares in companies or shares in funds. And they're particularly interested in businesses, investing in businesses. They may be for-profit, they may be non-profit with a they may be for-profit with a social mission, non-profit as well, that will generate social impact as well as, in some cases, environmental impact, while they also deliver a financial return. So again, donations are not part of this, although in a strategy to support these kinds of enterprises, as I'll show you later, sometimes you need grants at the front end to get the enterprise going and test the models. But we're really talking here about investments per se. They may be market rate, they may be market beating rates, or they may be below market rates as well, but there is a return. Sometimes there's a zero return that the investor agrees on, but their social return is what they're really after. But basically nobody wants to lose their principal investment in this work. So we're looking for companies that have an investment targets that have intention to create social or environmental benefits. And we're looking to prove, at least this field is, that there are tangible impacts. Not that it's just generally talked about, not that we have a few stories about it, although stories are not bad, but there's actually some benefits. And so that can be measured. And so this field is one that has it's very oriented towards metrics of various kinds. Not simplistically, but in a way that is quite sophisticated. So again, just trying to locate what we mean by where this impact investing space is. It's up on the top right-hand corner, the top right-hand quadrant here. We were very interested in investments that are high in returns, although again that can vary. It's not necessarily high. Sometimes they're modest returns. And we're particularly interested in impact investing in social returns that are high. And so contrasting that with philanthropy, where you give away your money, you may get high social returns, but you're not getting particularly high. You're not actually getting any financial returns. You're giving the money away. That's not what this is about. In this slide, one of the things that we distinguish here is between impact investors that are financial first, that is to say, because of their regulatory regimes, because of how they're governed and their mandates, like pension funds or investment banks or others that are big institutions, sovereign wealth funds, they must deal with the regulatory issues first, and they are concerned, they must be seen to be concerned about the financial interests of their members or sponsors. So they go into impact investments through the financial first window, but they're also at the same time very interested in the environmental and social dimensions. The same with impact first, although from the other side, these are often nonprofits or funds that have been specifically set up, like the Acumen Fund, which you may have heard of, based in the US, which are expressly designed to generate social impact of various kinds. And they're interested in a financial return, but that's, in a sense, secondary to what they're interested in. So there are different investors going in different ways. In the big global sense, there are many different players in this impact investing industry. The asset owners, who obviously own the money, high net worth individuals, that is wealthy individuals and families, are playing a prominent role in this work. Of course, other players, corporations, governments, employees, retail investors, foundations are also involved and own capital. But the other key group is the asset managers, the groups that actually make the decisions on a daily basis about where to put the money. They have guidelines and mandates from the owners, but they are the ones that actually do it operationally. So investment advisors, banks, again, are also managing money, venture funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and so on. There are many other players. But also in this space, we talk about demand-side actors, that is, the groups that receive the investments. And those may be corporations in some cases, small businesses, social enterprises, co-ops, microfinance institutions, community development finance institutions, and a range of players that are receiving these investments. And then their job is to generate the social returns or the environmental returns that they have said they would undertake. And there are other players in this industry that are more service providers, networks that bring together the industry, standard-setting bodies, other players that are involved that support what is going on in this field. And it's happening all over the world, although people define impact investing, or they use different terms. One of the most important organizations is the GIN. This is the Global Impact Investing Network. And this is a really highly professionalized group based in Wall Street in New York City, which really has some, what I would call, impact investing warriors in it. They really are taking it to Wall Street to try to loosen up some space for this kind of investing in the bigger investment world, which is, of course, very complex and very carnivorous, I would say. In the United Kingdom, there's an example of Big Society Capital, which has, actually, this is very interesting. They have taken inactive government accounts, which were found to, once they harvested these accounts, people had died or people had not remembered to go back to these accounts in various scenarios. 600 million pounds were scooped up and put into this Big Society Capital for long-term investments in intermediaries in the nonprofit sector that are generating social returns and also doing this on an investment basis, not a grant-making basis. That's a very interesting case, and there are many others around the world. These are just a few of them in India, South Africa, the Netherlands, Mexico, and Brazil, for example. And many more groups that are both investor organizations and also part of the world of service providers, as well as owners of capital and managers of capital. So there's a lot going on in the world around this. I guess I would put in parenthesis that my sense is, and one of the reasons I wanted to come down here, this is just pausing a little bit here, But to say that Nova Scotia has always been on the leading edge of doing this kind of work. It's not easy work to apply ethical or social criteria to investments, but it's happened here, and I think in a global sense, we should put you on the map, literally, because you've been doing some work over the years in this area. So I'm saying, you know, there's a world here of activity and industry that both could use you and also you could use them. There are all kinds of impact investment products, from private debt instruments, loans and guarantees, to private and government debt, equity-like debt in the form of convertible bonds and warrants. These are particular instruments that are used. There are shares, of course, that are purchased. There are now 6 or 7 social stock exchanges around the world, very small, but the idea is to get a matching function in these countries. South Africa is one, Brazil, Hong Kong, and elsewhere, to try to match investors that want to do this kind of investing with investee organizations and projects. And try to create a secondary market for these investments, because one of the issues with any kind of social investing outside of the regular stock markets is that you need to exit. Like any investor needs a way to exit. So you need to be able to sell your shares or somehow convert your investment and have someone else take it on so you can go and do something else with your money. So that's an effort there. That's very early days. There are also social impact bonds in the UK and the United States now, where private investors are invited to finance at the front end a social program or an intervention, social project. And the parties agree with government and a nonprofit and private investors that certain targets will be achieved in terms of program outcomes. There's one in the UK, for example, about reducing prisoner recidivism. And now that's a very difficult thing to do, first of all. The idea is that if the nonprofit can hit those targets that are agreed to by the investors and the government, that in fact the investors will get a premium on their investment, a return, a financial return. And government will be able to lever its money and use more money for other things because the front end has been financed by the private sector. That's an interesting one. It obviously, people have strong feelings about it on the ideological side sometimes, and we can come back to that example. But it's something that is quite dynamic, that Australia is very interested in this. The federal government here in our country is interested in experimenting, and I think there's interest in the province here as well. Lots of other products. One of the interesting things that the United States has that we don't is something called program-related investments that foundations and endowments can make. They can actually, rather than granting out all their money, they can in fact use their programmatic money to make loans or even equity investments for social purposes, which are within the realm of their mandate. We don't have that kind of flexibility yet in Canada, but it's a very interesting tool because obviously, maybe not so obviously, but what can happen here is that the nonprofit or the receptor of this kind of investment pays it back, and that money can be recycled for other such investments as well. And there are all kinds of other things going on, which I can talk about later in terms of products, but what's going on in general is a flourishing of a wider range of products in this industry. And there are lots of impact investors in localities across Canada. RBC and TD Bank have just set up impact investing funds themselves. There are, lots of other instruments, but it's a marketplace in Canada that's not terribly coherent or even, and it doesn't really talk to itself that well. So There are some jobs to do in Canada about how to pull these together and have information that is spread widely among potential investors, and then to have good information coming back to investors on the investments that they actually invest in. That is, what kinds of results are they having, both financial and social. I'm not saying tonight, nor will I say anytime, that this is a panacea. Impact investing is just part of the picture. It's just an industry that has developed, and there are people who are very committed to it and institutions that are very committed to it. It's not going to solve everything, and it isn't a replacement for the important role of philanthropy, that is grant making. It is not an excuse for governments, in my view, to ignore their obligations to marginalized groups or to redistribute wealth. That's what governments should do. So I'm not saying, some people may say in some parts of this industry that this is a silver bullet that will solve all things. It is not. But it is something that you need to know about, I would argue. And it's something that governments and foundations and private sector actors and nonprofit actors should be very literate in and may decide to engage. Because it has the ability to unlock new types of capital. And that's what that's the purpose of this, and that's the value for me of this. There's a lot of limitations in traditional investing that focus only narrowly on financial returns, when in fact there are lots of increasingly large number of ways of achieving social and environmental returns as well as good financial returns. There are also more wealthy investors, interestingly enough, interested in this, getting involved in this, which is important for a lot of reasons. Just some numbers to show that this is 2010, 2011. This is a field that is growing. There has been just in this year of these are billions of dollars, so $2.5 billion to $4.4 billion value from 2010 to 2011. That's a real understatement of how much is going on in this field, but this is a study that tracked at least that amount of money around the world. Most of it was in the form of private debt. So it's not being done on the organized markets, being done one-to-one by investors or funds with enterprises or projects. And there's more to say about this. This is a study that has been published by the GIN and JP Morgan and some other players. And it's really starting to happen around the world, as I've been saying, and so that's an interesting feature of all this. It's a very global industry that is, one of the things we said to Rockefeller when we looked at this was, yes, it is a global industry, but actually a lot of the capital is starting in the United States or in North America, but particularly the US, and it's finding its way to other parts of the world, and that's good, but that is not a global industry in a mature sense. A mature sense would be having investors in China and in Brazil and in Indonesia, putting money into their own regions as well as elsewhere. So that would be a much more, that would be a G20 approach to an industry, not a G8 approach to an industry. So that was an interesting discussion with Rockefeller because the American foundations start with the premise of, you start with the U.S. And that was it was useful to be a Canadian at that moment. It's also useful to get on a plane right after we said it. But they asked us back, so it was okay. This is just the example of the vaccine bonds. I'm not going to linger too much on this, but there is a whole history of the vaccine bonds that the Gavi Alliance, the Gates Foundation have been involved in, and they've created this international finance facility for immunization, which has been the vehicle to issue the bonds, which have financed the front-end work that have been pushing the pharmaceutical industry to get more vaccines to market and make them more affordable. This is a struggle that is ongoing. Those are very self-interested and big entities but there is some motion there, partly because of the bonds. I wanted to tell you about, I have two slides that illustrate something very important, at least in my view. One is that it takes a lot of time for an investment and a social enterprise to mature. It takes a matter of years. It takes a decade at least. And there's a lot of talk in this industry that we've been studying by entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs who are very anxious to get started, and they're great salespeople. But actually what they find is once they get their money, that actually it's a lot harder than just talking about it. It's a lot harder than putting up a website. It's a lot harder than the latest brochure that you have. It actually takes years. So this comes out of the Acumen Fund and the Monitor Group, looking at a process whereby a social enterprise develops a blueprint, a plan, tests that plan, tests the business model, enhances the conditions for expanding and growing that business, and then rolls out the model eventually to reach large numbers of customers or suppliers. Life is not quite this linear, but in fact, it's a pretty good description of how long, at least what the various phases are. And so if you think that you're going to go right from the blueprint to going to scale, that's unlikely. That may happen with eBay. I think it happened with eBay. It may happen a few times in history. But in fact, most enterprises, particularly social enterprises, take some time. And they go through adversity. It's not that they don't hit walls, and it's not that they don't have problems to deal with. So here's one case. This is a social enterprise, a global social enterprise that took about 15 years to mature. And you can see that at the front, this is international. This company works in India in particular and other parts of the world, poor regions. And so they had some money, grant money at the front end from USAID, the aid agency of the U.S. It had the Acumen Fund, which also does grants and investments as an impact investor. And then it had the Gates Foundation, which also could come in later with a program-related investment, a PRI. So this took a long time, and they didn't actually get it right for quite a while. They were experimenting, testing. So what this means is, I guess there are a couple things. One is, this is hard work. If you're going to do something over 10, 12, 15 years, you need a succession plan for leadership. You need to start with some young people, because it takes a while, and make sure that your leadership can get out of the way in good time to enable that process to continue. So there's some discipline here that is required, and some strategy that we often don't talk about, or at least don't talk about as much as we should. This is a slide on a concept called the theory of change. And it's simply to say that when enterprises or investors are saying they're going to achieve outcomes, social outcomes or environmental outcomes, that one of the ways they can make this clear to everybody is by setting out, often in a visual, how the theory of change works in their view to achieve those actual objectives. And there's a lot to say about all this, but basically, here's an example. Root Capital is another impact investing fund based in the U.S., working in many developing countries. It lends money, guaranteed by inventory, actually, of small and growing businesses in the rural sector, particularly in Latin America and Africa. So what they're trying to do is they're actually trying to not only lend money, but train their investees, these are usually co-ops actually, in financial management, investment management, and to try to do that in order to strengthen enterprise-level outcomes. That is, have those businesses grow and therefore try to achieve household-level outcomes, that is, better incomes, improved livelihoods, community-level outcomes, particularly gender equality is something they work on, and then to try to help the investee graduate, if you will, from their financing into the capital markets, the broader capital markets. That is, to strengthen their ability to access banks and other sources of capital, so they don't rely on impact investors per se. So that's an interesting way of looking at a theory of change. This is a very complex theory of change. This is what we used to analyze the Rockefeller Foundation program in impact investing. And this is a long discussion. I won't bore you with it. The blue things are actually clouds. And if you can't go through those clouds, you can't get to the next level. So these are barriers, or these are conditions that have to be either in place or barriers that have to be crossed. And those are just illustrative. But you can see that this was the work of the foundation at the bottom. They were doing a lot of course, grant making. They were trying to help this industry create structures and networks and standards and to scale up, and they do some work on policy issues as well. So that was the work of the foundation. And they were talking, though, pretty much all the time about improving the lives of the poor. And so when we looked at this program, we said, well, what's your theory of change? And so we built this structure to show that actually there are many different levels where the capital must channel upwards in impact investing if the lives of the poor are to be improved. And we said to the foundation, well, not only do we think you should be a G8, a G20 program, but we also think you should hold off talking too much about improving lives until the capital actually gets there. And you can show some real, and some of this has been, of course, happening, and that encouraged them to actually talk about concrete cases where it was happening rather than general statements that it would happen. But there's more to say about this diagram. I don't need to do that right now. There's a lot of work in the impact investing industry on the question of measuring social impact. There are all kinds of organizations and tools. It's a very interesting sector in that regard. So there's something called the Impact Reporting and Investment Standards, IRIS system, which tries to bring a common language of terms and standards to the sector. There is something called the B Corporation system, which tries to measure various dimensions, from donations to the community to how people treat their workers to environmental performance for social enterprises themselves. And there are many other, there's a global impact investing rating system, which is kind of like a Standard & Poor's rating mechanism for funds and enterprises in this sector. And many other things that are interesting, tools, and at least interesting to me if you like this kind of thing. Rating systems, tools, and so on. One that is very interesting is the tool called social return on investment. There are various ways of achieving that or carrying out that sort of analysis. Here's the IRIS system, a study that the IRIS program did of more than 460 organizations, that is mostly social enterprises, another 58, in 58 countries, nearly 2,000 microfinance institutions, and then they aggregated that information. And so what's going on in this study is that they're really trying to not just talk about metrics, but start to gather global data to begin the process of presenting data that can be analyzed for the industry. And this is a Gears rating report. You can go to the websites and see all of these things, but basically this is an example of a rating of an investment fund called Green Legacies. And so they're rating the fund in terms of its governance and how it treats its workers, how it relates to communities, how it deals with, how it performs in terms of the environment, and gives potential investors in that fund a report on these different dimensions, and then keeps reporting annually at least, goes and talks to the managers of the fund, goes and looks in the field and sees what's going on, try to get some verification of the performance of the fund itself and its investee companies. So that's a pretty interesting set of metrics. This is just really to show you that there are all kinds of different measurement tools, as well as the general ones, the system-wide ones, that are out there and that are being used and that are really within the last, most of them within the last 10 years and some of them within the last 5 years that have been emerging. So there's lots going on in this field, and they're being tested all over the world. Okay, so just on this issue of social impact, it's a field that is metrics rich but data poor, but this is changing. So there's a lot of talk about it, but it's moving very intentionally to gather real data rather than just talking about how important it is to collect the data. It's actually doing it, and that's a useful thing. But the focus of this is largely for investors. There's a lot of variation across the subsectors. So those organizations working in microfinance, those organizations working in affordable housing, those working in renewable energy, and so on, have different types of metrics right now. And there's tension between the centralized system and the decentralized system, but that's another matter. We can talk about that. So it's important that if you are interested in this field in any way, to begin to read about and understand the models and tools of social impact assessment. It's quite rich, and it's quite dynamic. What happens in impact investments that go wrong, when things go wrong? So this is a global issue. It's not just about this region. It's not just about the place where I live. I live in Ottawa, and bad things can happen to good ideas there too. It's very difficult to manage businesses that are trying to run as businesses and generate social or environmental returns. And I think one of the mistakes we've made in the past is we haven't said that. We've sort of been selling the idea in various ways, but the fact is it's hard. And it is something that you need to be trained to do and supported to do. And business environments are volatile. That's just the reality of the world. Plus, there's a lot of failure all the time in the private sector. Not that that's something anybody wants, but we know of lots of stories of successful entrepreneurs who have failed often and have eventually made it. This happens. It's not a good thing particularly, but it's something that happens to not just the impact investment sector, but the broader investment sector and business sector. But I think it's also worth saying that the two things that I've talked about today, capital and measurement, are not enough. And so what happens when something goes wrong in an investment or an enterprise? Well, here are my views. Each case should be evaluated, and sometimes whole programs should be evaluated to look back and see what the strengths and weaknesses were. If there are parties that are particularly vulnerable, they should be protected. There is usually a good case to be made for undertaking what I would call social return on investment analysis or other value analysis studies to see what actual value was produced, because often, even if there has been a financial issue or problem, there often has been social value created in some way, and that needs to be measured and communicated. Rebuilding the business plan, repositioning the enterprise, this is often something that is worth doing. Sometimes some businesses can't be rescued, and that's understood, but often there's a real possibility of and opportunity to replan. Strong business leadership and financial reporting is crucial to social enterprise, to receivers of impact investments, and that's as true in this sector as it is in any other business endeavor. Drawing lessons, sometimes we may need to strengthen the regulatory function and the monitoring function of these investments, but that given all of the other challenges we face in the broader economy, my view is, even when you hit adversity, it's important to do all these things, but then get back on the horse and keep riding. It's not a great Atlantic metaphor. There must be some other metaphor I could use with boats or fish. But the fact is, keep going. Because there are other parts of the mainstream economy, as we know, is not doing enough either for the social issues that we have. And so this is really important work. It's not easy work, but there are ways of dealing with this in the short term. In the long term, my long-term slide is gone, but I'll tell you what I had in the long term. In the long term, what we need to do is create a cohort of business managers who can manage the complexity of social enterprises. And that means being good at managing any business, as good as anybody else who manages a business, but at the same time to implement that social or environmental mandate at the same time successfully. And so we need to train people for that. This school perhaps could get involved in that kind of training. CCEPA could perhaps get involved in that kind of training. It's really up to each locality to figure out who should do that. But we have a need for young people to, and I think many young people have a need to work in businesses that are meaningful, that are going to make the world better and also deliver a good job to them and the future for their families. And so that's a skill set that really needs to happen. And my sense is that not only might you do something here along those lines, you also might be able to model some ways of doing this for other parts of Canada and indeed maybe even for some of the countries that I've mentioned in my talk tonight. Back to the global level, there's a lot of activity and interest in increasing or accelerating the rate of impact investing, notwithstanding the challenges that we're talking about, because it's important, because people have started to move towards this industry. And so evaluating, monitoring, learning, and improving, all of that is very important. Adapting as you go, as you learn. So increasing the velocity of doing that, doing it faster, not doing it superficially, but making that happen faster. Increasing the velocity of scaling up the capital pools that are available for this kind of investing, diversifying the products and services, strengthening the capacity of social enterprises to receive that capital. That's one of the other issues in this field that is important. And that often takes grant money. It doesn't lend itself necessarily to investments per se. Refining cost-effective impact measurement tools, that's important. And then building the leaders of the future, the leaders who will be the investors, who will be the managers and the workers of these enterprises that are receiving the funds. This is a report that we've just put out, and it's on the Rockefeller website, which is a very big scan of the impact investing industry and where it could go, where it's been, and where it could go in the future. Very global. I think it could put you to sleep sometimes, but basically it is something available to you if you want to study this and look at this further. There are lots of other resources, books, reports on all kinds of things. There's a very good study by Steve Godecki of social impact bonds, which you might want to look at if you're interested in that. There's a great book by Anthony Bug Levine and Jed Emerson on impact investing. It came out a couple of years ago, and many other reports. Most of which I think I've used excerpts from tonight. There are organizations. There are organizations in this province, of course, too, but Here are a few from other places. The center that I'm involved with at Carlton University in Ottawa has some great work going on in this area by other colleagues. The GEARS, this is the rating system, might be of interest to some of you. The GIN, the network, the big network, is also very open and very rich in content. The Mars Center for Impact Investing in Toronto is also starting to gear up. There's a small company in Toronto called Purpose Capital, which also is advising on these kinds of investments. Social Investment Organization has been doing work on responsible investment in Canada for a long time. And there's even a social return on investment network in Canada linked to a global network on that. So those might be of interest to you as well. I'm sorry that this went on for a while, but it's my one chance to give you a brain dump. And that's it. That's what I've got for you, and I hope it's been useful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ted. An amazing amount of value for us here to take all that in and bring it to the context of Nova Scotia. We've got some time for questions now.
I noticed that the total investment that you in the social area in the world showed about $2 billion in North America, and I was just curious. Does Canada pick up about 10% of that, or is it a little more or a little less?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at that point, that was 2010, they were tracking maybe 10% of that, but it actually is more. I showed you that slide. It's the only data that we have in that form, and it's got nice pie charts. But if you did the same study now, people know more about where the money is, who's investing it. You'd probably get about $20 billion, maybe even $30 billion globally, and within that, I would say Canada would be 500 million, maybe, if you count it, broadly.
I'm just wondering whether the implied social consciousness of most Canadians vis-a-vis North America is, resulting in more investment, or is it all talk?
Right. Well, I think the Americans are ahead of us on products and funds and services and windows for doing this, but we actually have a great deal of potential to grow. I think you're right. Thanks. Nice to see you again, too.
Hi. I guess my question would be very similar to Alan's. Can you give us are there some Canadian examples, and perhaps tell us a little bit about how it happened, the genesis, who the players are, just make it a bit more real for us?
Right. You want real? I don't think they asked me to do real here. No. The fact is that this kind of work in some way has been going on for certainly 30 years and maybe longer in my professional lifetime, at least 30 years. So the early work of New Dawn Enterprises and Greg MacLeod in Cape Breton with BCA Holdings doing investments in Cape Breton and tourism and a variety of other sectors, radio station I think he invested in, and many others, really was looked at by other Canadians and then spurred a number of things going on by other Canadian investors. So at the very local community level, we have community development corporations and community loan funds. We've had cooperative development funds over the years. It's taken quite a bit of, it's been very diverse. And so I would say the last 30 years, if I could say that, have been, uncoordinated innovation in the chart that you saw up here. Really smart, committed people doing remarkable things, but unconnected, really, in an industry sense. Now there's some, I would say, a surge of interest in some quarters to create an industry here that has some coherence and the communication, better information. And so this Mars Center that I mentioned, the center, which is a research center in Toronto, don't hold that against them. They're still pretty good. Is going to be taking a leadership role in trying to build the industry, impact investing industry in Canada. I would see it as a more of the latest in a historical movement that has a chance to actually do something serious and put this industry together. And the other thing that's happening is that some bigger investors or bigger institutions are coming to the table, like the RBC and TD Bank. Those examples, those are $20 million funds, and those funds should be recycled, you know, in a sense, out and then in through investments over time. We have some very interesting work going on. Paul Martin, former Prime Minister, has been involved in some Aboriginal investment work, putting together a fund for that. Those are not easy projects, obviously, either. There's lots of work to do there. So lots going on in Canada, lots going on in this region, but not coherent in the sense that it hasn't congealed into an industry. We don't have yet the infrastructure, and we don't have, I don't think, an efficient set of tools to measure the impact of what these investments are doing, but we're getting there. So lots of progress. I would say the next 10 or 15 years are going to be really interesting, and if you're a young person, gear up, because it's going to be an interesting ride.
Hi, Dick. My name is Brent Gray. I'm a director of the Social Investment Organization. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come down to Halifax and share this information with us. Ted, I think you and Kareem Harji did a fabulous job with the Rockefeller Foundation, the study you did on a global basis. A lot of very useful information there. In your study, or from the information that you're getting as you're looking at this emerging idea globally, do you think here in Canada that there are any changes required within the securities regulation in order to achieve this vision, the vision you just finished talking about over the change in the next 10 to 15 years? Do the provincial governments, the securities regulators, have to make any changes in your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I didn't even talk about some of the other things that are going on in this field. One of them is crowdfunding, where there has to be regulatory change as well. To us, that's another story, but we can talk about that later. Short answer is yes. I mean, there's a lot of regulatory work that has to be done. Your organization is very important to do that work, but there are others that I think you should join with, some of which I've mentioned. And there are regulatory models and instruments and regulations that we could potentially borrow from other jurisdictions. I think that's a really important thing. Australia, the UK, some of the US work. You can't always directly apply it, but you can draw from it, and sometimes you can directly apply it. I think one of the advocacy issues, or at least tactics that could be quite useful, is to bring to this, you know, if we're talking about Nova Scotia, bring some people here who have done this elsewhere. Regulators, bring the advocates who actually run the funds, bring people who have received the funds and show how it works on the ground. So that's, you know, accessing people from the outside for moving things internally in the jurisdiction is really useful. I think there's work to be done for pension funds. There's work to be done for banks. There's work to be done for foundations through, that's more of a federal issue, through the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency. So part of this is figuring out which jurisdictions, which institutions, and sequencing it in a manageable way. So, but it's very important work. It's a great question. And thanks for the compliments. I did not pay him to say any of that, so yeah, thanks.
I'm going to combine what you said with you weren't here, obviously, but some of the people here were with the previous CCEPA program. You were talking about this mostly from the point of view of the business, the corporate world getting involved in the impact of this. We had a program a few months ago, a month or two ago, about someone talking about direct action, more social action, social activism, and things like this. Have you ever approached people in that field from sort of the outside of the corporate world and say, hey, you can come into this, this is a way we can do things, have a positive impact, some of the things you're trying to do in this? I believe a few years ago, Ralph Nader, actually, who's been fighting the corporate world for his whole career, and actually got wise and sat down with some people, I don't know if it's philanthropic or investment, but tried to get them together in some mutually desirable things in this. And have you tried to get some of those people into this thing from the outside of the business corporate world?
Right.
To do some things.
It's a great issue. Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you look at the sector and you talk to the leaders, certainly this was the case in our Rockefeller study, we sometimes found that the people who were leading in some funds or some businesses were actually former activists, or they themselves were activists, you know, when they went home or in their community. But it's true that we have some gaps between the way that some social activists see these issues and the way that some business people see these issues. This is why I was saying I'm becoming quite susceptible to CCEPA, that it also could be a bridge, a place where some of these conversations could happen. I think the mistake would be to be too simplistic about it and expect everybody, just because they're rational and committed, would agree on everything. They won't. Some people have had a rough experience on the social activist side with corporate behavior, and some corporate behavior has been egregious. I mean, this is real. On the other side of it, on the social activist side, there's been some knee-jerk reactions to anything that sounds or smells like business. And I'm not sure that's so useful, especially when youth unemployment is so high, especially when we've tried many other things and they have been either modestly successful or haven't gone very far. This is a time for really sorting out what is the common agenda, and we won't be able to work with each other, if I could put it that way, on all things all the time. And there will be disagreements. I think that's an important part. But there are common issues that we could agree on, and types of enterprises or types of funds that might be set up with criteria that could satisfy a significant segment of activists, say on the environmental side, and bring in government and private sector players who also agree with these things. So I think it's a matter of finding a way to have a dialogue. We were talking at dinner about the possibilities of Nova Scotia being of a sufficient size and having a certain amount of social consensus, if you will, to be able to model for the rest of Canada how you might have these conversations. And I don't want to load too much on you, too much responsibility, but the fact is we have to have this discussion where it can happen. And this may be one of the places where it can happen on some things. So thanks for that question.
Any further questions? I have a question while you're thinking of your question. I have a question about scale. It seems like the role of enabling organizations is pretty critical, whether it be evaluation or training or linking to private sector capital and so forth. And so for us in Nova Scotia, I guess I'm scratching my head and thinking, well, is that something we should be trying to build provincially? Should we be trying to join with a national kind of brain trust or knowledge hub, or is it something maybe that's regional? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? Because it does seem like that intermediary role seems really critical, since you're talking about kind of big worlds that don't usually connect. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in using the scale that suits the purpose. In other words, if you're trying to aggregate knowledge and it's in your interest to go to an international level even and try to get the best knowledge from there through a network or through some kind of ally or partner, that's where you go. I mean, in a sense, all entities have to be global right now, anyway. So, I mean, and it's easier than it ever was. And in fact, the young people, if I could say this, already are global in the way they see these issues. So, so I think, you know, rather than, it may be worth thinking that, or kind of shifting our perception to say, go global first, which does not mean that the integrity of this region or this locality is under pressure. It's just that, or is deficient. It's quite the opposite. But in order to get the best knowledge everywhere, in order to bring your knowledge to so I'm talking about knowledge, I think that the scale of global is the place to go. And then once you find tools and models that suit this locality, you bring them back. And once you contribute at the global level, you know, the world needs more Nova Scotia. I mean, it actually does, I think. So I would like you to be there at those global tables, contributing your experience and your knowledge. So, I mean, I think this is a practical issue. It's not, the world needs solutions that come out of localities that are thoughtful and productive. In terms of capital, it might be different. In terms of capital, you may want to aggregate at the level of the region and run a program that is very regional and have enough capital that you can actually lever it. And there may be some things you want to do very locally. So I think it really is a tactical matter. And but I think the first thing we have to learn is immediately to think global. And then after that, you sort of step back and you say, okay, well, what do we really need to do here? Who should be our allies? What kinds of networks? What kinds of funds and products? And kind of work back to the local. That seems to work better these days than starting the other way. Oh, this guy's trouble. I know this guy.
I have two questions. The first, you haven't really talked about Great Britain and what's happening there. This is with the new Conservative government. There was lots of announcements about social investment. So I was wondering if you could just touch on that quickly. And the other issue is our own federal government. There was a fairly large article in the Globe and Mail, I think in November, that the current government was working on this area, and I just wondered if you were aware of what's happening in Ottawa. Is there some sort of discussions of the current government taking action on this?
Okay, so let's start with the federal government, go to Britain. Yeah, I think there is an interest in, by the federal government, particularly HRSDC, the Human Resources Department, in social finance. And they've called for concepts by different groups on different types of social finance products and programs. And they are, I know they're working because, you know, we hear things in Ottawa. And they announced some things in the budget. I think we'll see more in the budget on this. Where they go with that and what the politics of it are pretty complicated. I think we have to be alert. You know, I'm not here and I'm not in this business to use social impact bonds as covers for cutting social programs. I mean, that's not what I do. So we'll just have to stay alert that it's not used for that. But I think levering money for more work and coverage and innovation is a good idea in a small country. Remember, Canada is the size of a small Chinese province. And China is growing very quickly. So we need all the tools that we have to mobilize and all the institutions we have to continuously renovate. In the case of the UK, it's a very interesting case. So what we are seeing is the Cameron government very interested in social impact bonds, doing some interesting things, experiments with those, has set up Big Society Capital, which I mentioned, of 600 million pounds of inactive government accounts, which is a very creative way to pool capital. and doing many other things. And also its aid agencies doing some very creative things internationally around these products and strategies. But I want to say this. It looks, the Cameron government is doing this, but actually there were 10 or 15 years of work under the two Blair governments as the basis for this, for what's happening now. People have been very focused on, and were focused from the beginning before Blair got in organizing the social enterprise sector and organizing the players there. They also have had some very high-profile actors in the business community that have taken a real leadership role in this. That has been very important for getting some segments of the business community on side. And that's an important role for people like Alan Shaw and others to potentially take in this jurisdiction. This is a bit of a tangent, but it reminds me that I didn't tell you too much about Quebec, but you may know that, of course, Quebec is a very different political entity and cultural entity, but it has had a very significant trust, social enterprise trust set up by the social economy sector there. It's a whole other story. It's been building for the last 20 years, and it now has this significant trust of $50 or $60 million, which lends money directly to social enterprises in all sectors for long-term debt financing, which is very useful. Helps people buy buildings, it helps them expand, and so on. So there's a whole story at the provincial level, which I didn't get to, about the Quebec experience. And in BC, there are some very significant institutions as well, including Van City Credit Union, which you may have heard of, which does very large scale support of social enterprise and a wide range of instruments for what I would call impact investing. They call them other things. And that's just in the province of BC. So there are examples in Canada of these institutions that have scaled up where they have done that within a provincial jurisdictional framework, a regulatory framework. Those two cases are often, are not exactly outliers, but often because of their history, because of their social structure, if you will, have often been very experimental and innovative and have gotten to scale faster than some of the other provinces. Ontario, for example, not there. So part of it depends on civil society and the business community and government being supportive, coming together to make these things happen within the provincial jurisdiction. Some of it depends on government action and regulatory change, as we talked about. You need a government at the federal level that would be very, I would say, proactive on this to make some of the changes with the CRA and make some of the other changes. So it's not just that it's the federal level. Yes, in theory, the federal level can and should make a difference in this field. And does have the reach, but it would have to have the will, the political will to do that. I'm not sure the current government does. It has the political will to experiment with these tools, but whether it would want to take a really proactive role is a question. Provincially, yes, I think there's much room for provincial leadership in some of these areas, and I know that there are discussions ongoing, certainly here, but in other provinces as well around this.
My name is Peter Boyd, and I happen to be privileged to be one of the board members of CCEPA. And I would like to just thank Ted for your presentation. One of the things I must admit, I thought I had some understanding of socially responsible investing. I think I had very little knowledge, and now I've got a little bit more, and now I'm interested to gain even more. Hopefully you are as well. But thank you, Ted, very much. Arthur, thank you for your participation this evening. And I would also like to thank St. Mary's for the use of the room, but also St. Mary's, AST, who are two of our co-founding institutions for their ongoing support. And I would like to thank our sponsors for the event. CBURN, which is the Canadian Business Ethics Research Network, the Ecology Action Center. If you didn't notice the big sign on your way in, you may notice it on the way out. Farm Works, Port of Halifax, Nova Scotia Cooperative Council, and I'd like to thank you for coming. I'd also like to thank the live stream of audience for tuning in and for everyone's great participation in the question and answer period. And quite frankly, I think there was great questions, so I think that's indicative of the engagement of the audience. So that's great. Thank you again. I would encourage you to fill out evaluation cards before you have an opportunity to leave, and certainly we'll continue the conversation with our reception out in the hallway. Thanks again.